All right. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Allison Timberlake, who I had the pleasure of working with for quite some time when I was at the Department of Education. Allison, there's been a change even since the bio is in there. She is no longer interim Deputy Superintendent for Assessment and Accountability. She is now Deputy Superintendent of Assessment and Accountability. So congratulations to Allison. But I think this is something that everybody's going to be very interested in. I know that was always an interest that I would deal with for years, is accountability and what that means in schools. So Allison, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I think you're the first person to offer congratulations instead of condolences. But it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. It's always an exciting time in the world of assessment and accountability. And you all know a lot about ESSA. We've spent a lot of time talking about it. You've heard about it plenty over the last 2 years or so. But I will just reiterate, it is a really exciting opportunity and time for us in Georgia because it gave us a really unique opportunity to talk about a lot of the things that you've already heard about this morning, to bring everyone to the table, to work with stakeholders, to work with partners and other organizations, to talk about these issues and bring them together into a single comprehensive plan for, on the education side, how we plan to address that within our state. And it really was a stakeholder-driven plan for us in Georgia. We solicited that feedback. We worked with advisory committees and working committees of stakeholders to help us write this plan. I would like to focus a little bit more on the accountability side of things this morning. Superintendent Woods will talk a little bit more about some of the assessment initiatives that we have coming up. So I would like to focus a little bit on our redesigned College and Career Ready Performance Index. This will be the index first coming out in fall of 2018. So when you start to see that new data, this is kind of the framework and theory behind that. We've heard a lot of things about CCRPI over the years. It was a good thing for Georgia. It was a vast improvement over No Child Left Behind and AYP. It had multiple measures. It was a more comprehensive look at school performance. But nevertheless, over time, there were certainly shortcomings that we started to see with that, and we heard that feedback loud and clear. We heard that we needed to simplify it, that it needed to focus just on those key opportunities and outcomes. We heard that the index needed to be structured in such a way that it didn't incentivize gaming or chasing points. Minimize annual changes, focus on school improvement. We heard a lot about needing to update our online reporting system to something that was more user-friendly, with more comparative information, and certainly to be able to release results earlier. And that's the work that we did through this redesign process with our committees of stakeholders. We reduced the number of indicators. At some levels, like the high school, it's been reduced by half, from 30 to about 15 indicators. The indicators that remain focus on the key opportunities and outcomes expected of all students across the state. And by doing that, it should help minimize chasing points, minimize those annual changes, and provide opportunities for schools to show improvement and growth. We've simplified the scoring structure. All indicators and components will be reported on a 100-point scale to help with the understanding and interpretation. We started work on a new online reporting system, one that'll be easier to comprehend and navigate. It'll have more comparative information. It'll be easier to search through and find the school or district that you're looking for. And we've already started work on streamlining our processes to release results earlier. Hopefully you saw just in this past year, we released both graduation rates and CCRPI scores just over a month earlier than in years before that. And as we continue to move forward with this streamlined CCRPI, we'll look for additional ways to streamline things and get results out even earlier. So this is a snapshot of what our redesigned CCRPI looks like. This is the result of our Accountability Working Committee. They really wanted to focus the system with having a vision that accountability should play that supporting role to all the other great work that we do in schools to educate our children. It should not be the driving force behind the decisions about educating students. And so with that in mind, they defined the purpose of CCRPI to provide an objective measure of how well we are doing as a state in providing high-quality opportunities and outcomes for our students. CCRPI has been simplified into 5 components: content mastery, progress, closing gaps, readiness, and graduation rate. We will continue to calculate and report the school climate and financial efficiency star rating for informational purposes. And I'll take just a minute to walk through each of these components for you. So we'll start with content mastery, and this is about achievement. It's our achievement scores in English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. We will utilize weights based on achievement level to incentivize moving all students to the next level and to acknowledge the level of proficiency that they have demonstrated. So as you may know, with Georgia Milestones, we have 4 achievement levels ranging from beginning learner to distinguished learner. You can see that there's a differentiated point structure there based on the level of proficiency that students demonstrate. ESSA does maintain the 95% assessment participation requirement. It also requires that accountability systems take into account when schools or subgroups don't reach that 95%. So in accordance with that, we will adjust achievement scores if participation rates aren't at or above 95%. And that's a straightforward adjustment there. We'll multiply the achievement score by the participation rate over 95. So if the achievement rate was 80 and only 94% of students participated, we would multiply 80 by 94 over 95. So that ensures the adjustment is proportional to the extent to which that 95% participation was missed. The next component is progress, and this is about student growth and improvement. We'll have progress scores in English language arts, mathematics, and then progress towards English language proficiency for our English learner students. For ELA and mathematics, we'll continue to utilize student growth percentiles, which measure how much growth a student has demonstrated relative to academically similar students. We will again provide weighting based on the level of growth that students demonstrate, ranging from low to high growth. And then for our progress towards English language proficiency, our EL proficiency assessment in the state of Georgia is the access for ELLs, and that has a scale associated with it, and then performance bands that describe the level of proficiency students have demonstrated. So again, we'll provide differentiated weighting based on how much students have improved, whether they don't move at all, move one band, or move more than one band. And this is not new for our educators or our schools. We've had a very similar measure based on the access assessment in CCRPI for several years, so they're familiar with this. The third component is closing gaps. So we're proposing a new target structure for CCRPI. These are the goals that all schools will be expected to meet. We're going to be calculating individual targets for all schools and districts for their all students group as well as each of their subgroups. And the target is to improve 3% of the gap between their baseline performance and 100. So the improvement target would be 100 minus their baseline score, which is their 2017 score, times 3%. And so that sets an expectation of improvement or a maintenance of high achievement levels for all students. It also provides schools with an opportunity within the index to demonstrate the improvements that they're making among all subgroups, not just with the overall all students group. So what's kind of hidden is what the target structure and the flags look like. So if a school or a subgroup does not make any improvements in their achievement rate, they would get a red flag, and that would be worth 0 points for closing gaps. If they make improvements, like the rate goes from 50 to 51, but they don't meet their 3% target, they'd get a yellow flag, and that's worth 0.5 point. If they meet their 3% target, it's a green flag worth 1 point. And then for our economically disadvantaged English learner and student with disability subgroups, they can earn 1.5 points for meeting a 6% target. And so that's built in to incentivize accelerated levels of improvement among our traditionally most underperforming subgroups. So then the closing gaps would be that aggregate measure of the extent to which subgroups are meeting their annual improvement targets. The fourth component is readiness, and this is where we get at the additional measures of readiness for the next grade, college, or career. The elementary and middle school readiness indicators focus on foundational skills, and then the high school readiness indicators build on that to also look at some other opportunities to demonstrate readiness for post-secondary pursuits. For elementary and middle school, there are 3 readiness indicators. The first is literacy, which looks at the reading comprehension level of students at all grade levels. Student attendance, here we're utilizing more of a chronic absenteeism definition to attendance. We're looking at the percent of students who are absent less than 10% of days. And the research is really quite clear on that, and so that's why we went with this definition to really target schools where attendance and school climate and these are really an issue in impacting the success of those students. The third indicator at both levels is beyond the core. And this one is in direct response to the stakeholder feedback we received across the state. We heard frequently and all across the state from parents and other community members that they really wanted to ensure that their students were having access to courses beyond the traditional academic core. They didn't just want to sit in reading and math all day. They wanted art, they wanted music, they wanted language, they wanted career exploratory. And so we built in these indicators to measure and highlight the extent to which students are participating in those courses. At the high school level, we continue to have literacy and student attendance, but we also have accelerated enrollment, which looks at the percent of graduates earning credit through accelerated enrollment activities or opportunities such as advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and dual enrollment. We have pathway completion, which looks at the percent of graduates completing one of these pathways, advanced academic, career tech, fine arts, or world language. And then we have a college and career readiness measure. And this is a measure that looks at the percent of graduates who have demonstrated some kind of readiness for the next level. And I won't read through all of them, but it provides a lot of different opportunities for students to demonstrate that, whether it's through test scores on assessments such as the SAT, the ACT, or AP, or it's completing an end of pathway assessment leading to an industry credential or a work-based learning experience. We continue to have graduation rates for high schools only. So elementary and middle will just have the first 4 components, whereas high schools will continue to have graduation rate. We include both the 4 and 5-year graduation rate with more weight placed on the 4-year rate. So we will continue to report the overall CCRPI score on a 100-point scale. The minimum N size for an indicator or component to be reported and included is 15. That's what it is now. That will continue. But to ease in the understanding and interpretation of the scores, we are going to report every indicator and every component on the 100-point scale. I know for those of you that in the past have tried to dig into the CCRPI scores, it could be a little challenging because they were reported in terms of the points allocated to it. So achievement will be reported out of 50 points and then progress out of 40, which made it a little more challenging to compare the 45 in achievement with the 38 in progress. So we're going to report every indicator and every component on the 100-point scale, so it's simpler and you can make those comparisons. And then the maximum score for any indicator or component will be 100. And then we will weight the components according to these weights at the right to produce the overall score. So you'll have a score out of 100 for every indicator. Those get rolled up into a 100-point score for each component. And then we multiply by these weights to give you an overall score, again, out of 100. And so this is just a summary of all of the indicators put together. I make this joke a lot. I may think it's the only one that's funny, but this is the first time we've ever been able to get all CCRPI indicators on one slide. And so that is, in a way, very exciting. Normally it takes about 6 slides to scroll through all of them. So just visual evidence of the simplification and the streamlining of the index. I just want to highlight a couple of aspects of the redesigned CCRPI, and this just emphasizes the theory and the thought process that the committee put behind designing this. The redesigned CCRPI really does maximize local flexibility to determine the best programs and policies to meet the needs of their students. No more of the chasing points. In the past, in CCRPI's attempt to be more comprehensive, it included indicators that sometimes resulted in pressuring schools to adopt a particular program or policy because they didn't want to leave points on the table. For example, there used to be a high school indicator around the percent of graduates completing a career capstone project. Well, for some schools and some students, that may be a fantastic opportunity, but for another school, they may want to be STEM certified or they may want to do something different. And so when there's an indicator around one particular program or policy, it effectively mandates that everyone needs to do that, otherwise you risk leaving points on the table. So by simplifying the index to those main opportunities and outcomes, achievement, growth, improvement, and those key readiness indicators, that removes that opportunity, I guess, for chasing points and really leaves that local flexibility in place to determine what's going to work best for students. The redesigned index values educating the whole child, which is a major theme in ESSA and the work that you're hearing across all of these different initiatives. We see things like exposing students to a well-rounded curriculum, engagement, school climate, the relevance offered by pathways, the opportunities for accelerated enrollment, and the post-secondary readiness, being able to demonstrate that through many different opportunities, whether it's an SAT score if you plan to go on to post-secondary, or work-based learning if you're planning to go straight into the world of work. There's many opportunities available there. And then one of the last things that the committee really focused on as they designed this is they wanted to make sure CCRPI was awarding points where possible, as opposed to just denying them when expectations aren't met. And that's why we see things throughout the index where you can earn partial points if progress is made but targets aren't met, and then extra points when targets are exceeded. And that's just an effort to really identify and acknowledge the work that schools are doing. Students can make tremendous growth but not quite cross the proficiency bar. And so by incorporating the structure to it, it allows that to be demonstrated through the index and acknowledged. Okay. I'm not going to read this, but we thought you might be interested in it, so we wanted to provide it to you. This is the criteria for identifying schools for support under ESSA. There's 2 levels of support: comprehensive support and improvement and targeted support and improvement. CSI is really designed to focus on those schools that have more systematic issues and need assistance across the board. So there's 3 categories to CSI support. Let me just say these are all ESSA categories and in the federal legislation. So we weren't the ones that came up with so many different ways of getting on the list. But the first criteria is the lowest 5%, and this is a very similar criteria to the turnaround eligible list. It's those Title I schools that, based on their overall CCRPI score for 3 years, are in the lowest 5%. Additionally, any high school with a graduation rate equal to or less than 67% would get identified. And then those Title I schools who are on the targeted list for 3 years without meeting the exit criteria would move to the CSI list. Then for targeted support and improvement, or TSI, there's 2 criteria, or 2 ways to get on. And the second is a subset of the first. So for the first one, it would be any school that has a subgroup performing in the lowest 5% for at least half of their CCRPI components. So for example, if their English learner subgroup was performing in the lowest 5% for content mastery and progress, they would get identified for support. So it's not necessarily all students in the school that are performing less than expected, but a particular subgroup. And then additional targeted support is a subset of that. It would be any school with a subgroup performing in the lowest 5% for all components.
Are you keeping the same subgroups from No Child Left Behind?
Yes. Yes, same subgroups from No Child Left Behind. And the last thing I would just like to highlight is, as you have probably given us the feedback yourselves, and as we've heard across the state, our old CCRPI reporting system could be a little cumbersome and difficult to navigate. So we've been working to develop a new one. This is a prototype of that system. It's simplified, it's streamlined. We've built it around questions and built in more information and calculation details to be able to provide that explanation for those that would like to see it. We will disaggregate every indicator and component by subgroup, so you can see how different subgroups are doing across the components. You can export data, export a PDF if you want to take it with you. And we invite you to go to our website at accountability.godot.org, and you can click through the prototype yourself. It's not a fully functioning website, so don't get angry if you try and click one particular link and it doesn't work. But there's several different pages built, and there's also a video overview there to walk through it if you're interested. So, yes?
I'm missing something important, I think. How does getting 1 point for progress, for example, translate into the 1 to 100? Is that 1 point out of that 100?
Okay, so that's a student level weighting that's associated with it. So let's say you had 100 students with a growth percentile. If you had 30 of them in the low growth range, they would get a 0, so it'd be 30 times 0. Then if you had 10 or 15 in the typical range, that's worth 1. It would be that 30 times 1. And then let's say the remaining, I'm sorry, I've lost the math already, but say the remaining 10 are in the highest level of growth, it would be that 10 times 1.5. And you would do that multiplier, add it up, divide by the total number of students, and that gives you the score out of 100. And should it go above 100, because they had a lot of students in that highest growth range, we would cap it at 100 for the overall score.
And then you've got 100 on progress, say. And what % of that is the overall score?
Yes, so let me come back here. So you get, every component has a score out of 100, and then these are the weights. So if we just take high school as the example, we would take your content mastery score times 30%, plus your progress score times 30%, plus your closing gap score times 10%, plus your readiness score times 15%, and your graduation rate score times 15%, and then add that together, and it would be out of 100 as well. Yes, sir.
How dependent on the Fed's final okay on the ESSA plan is this CCRPI redesign?
So it's still tentative until the plan is fully approved. We just got our feedback letter and had our conversations with USAID, and our updated plan, I guess, was just submitted recently, so we hope to hear back from them in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so this could be changed?
It could. We feel good about it. We had a lot of conversations with them. We ran some language by them before we resubmitted it, so we're hopeful, but it could.
I'm sure this is in here somewhere where I've missed
Sure.
it, but for schools that have high churn rates, where they're seeing a lot of kids come in and out, and maybe they don't have the exact same student body at the end of the year that they had at the beginning of the year, is there some kind of mechanism that, I don't know, accounts for the fact that those schools or students or classrooms may not show as much growth?
So in terms of including students in the system, students have to be enrolled in the school for a full academic year. We call it phase students, which is at least 65% of the school year, to be included in the achievement and the growth and the improvement categories. So that way we ensure, to your point, that the students included represent those that were there for a significant amount of the instruction for the year. Yes?
Can you go back to the slide that shows copy mastery? I thought, now I could be wrong, but I thought there was a law passed last year that school systems could consider SAT, ACT nationally normed so that their students can be compared against the national and not just Georgia as part of that. Is that not part of CCRPI, that they cannot use national norm testing?
So ESSA allows an opportunity for flexibility where a state and districts could adopt a nationally recognized assessment in lieu of the state assessment. And so there's a process in place for that, and that opportunity is available. But as of right now, no one is actively pursuing that.
Okay, so you could use ACT scores in lieu of high school milestones.
Yes, there's a lot of requirements and work that has to be done, and the assessments have to go through federal peer review and things like that. But ultimately, yes, it could be done.
But you cannot use the Iowa test of basic skills.
No.
That's not
Most
right.
important things parent.
Correct, it could not. It's a high school, ESSA allows it for high schools only, and it would have to be a nationally recognized assessment used for a college acceptance or placement, according to ESSA. And that's one of the things Superintendent Woods will speak about, an assessment flexibility task force that's meeting, and that's one of the flexibility options that they're going to be pursuing and taking a look at for our state.
The school climate, that to me, I don't understand the school climate rating because I think it just doesn't give anything to parents. But is it, I saw you start it, but it's not considered as part of the criteria for CCRP.
Correct, it's calculated and reported for informational purposes,
not
but it's
for
not
anything.
part of the scoring.
When I was looking at the efficiency ratings, it seemed to me the richest schools have the highest ratings and poor schools have low ratings, and that's pretty much all I got out of that statistic. Is that wrong with me, or is that being adjusted, or I don't really understand.
For the financial efficiency rating, I'm afraid with that one, I don't know that much about it. We can certainly get the information to you.
Well, it's not information, but interpretation.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Allison. I think y'all find that's good information as CCRPI scores come out, and you'll have a better sense of what that system looks like and how it goes out, and we'll all be waiting to see what happens with ESSA ultimately. But now it is my pleasure to introduce Superintendent Richard Woods. As y'all know, I had the pleasure of working with him for several years. It's always good to have him here at this event to give kind of an update on what are the big things that he sees coming for the year for the Department of Education, whether that be through the legislative session or just in general. So again, as I've said with everyone else, you have the bios in there. You can read through those, but Superintendent Richard Woods. You as well. There's the clicker.
Clicker, all right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think this is the fourth time, so we continue to roll along and see how things go. So again, we wish the Bulldogs the very best on Monday, and hope that the tide gets rolled. So that's my little say about that. But people always ask me, "Are you politically correct?" And I say, "No, not when it comes to sports. That really doesn't have a place for that." But it is a pleasure to be with you this morning, once again, to give you kind of an update, again, from perhaps my perspective and the department's perspective on education. I do want to say thank you to the Georgia Partnership for their work and ongoing support of education and really just focusing on trying to improve the opportunities for our children throughout the state. Again, roughly about 1.8 million students attend public education today. So it's an exciting time for us, and we'll kind of move on and cover a few topics this morning. Of course, some of the things that you've already heard a little bit about, ESSA. Of course, every Student Succeeds Act, the Georgia Plan, and we'll kind of share some information on that, kind of where we stand and our expectations. Again, I know Ms. Timberlake, kind of touched on that. But looking at the timeline and where we are with ESSA itself. Now we're really getting, into really implementation. That's what we're looking forward to, and as we move forward in the days ahead. We did receive feedback, I think, as Dr. Timberlake said, from USAID. It has been a process in which we started off with, with a phone call, and then a letter with their input, and it has been ongoing. This is, not an unusual process. Some people have asked, are there bumps in the road? And really what I would say is that, the process overall has been very positive. It was something that as we look at the processes and what other states have seen, nothing really, stood out as any different from any other state. When we looked at the feedback, a lot of it was, again, very positive. We didn't see a lot of critique in the sense of you have to make major changes. But a lot of it was, basically operational in sense, clarification of language, looking at, what, our interpretation of statute, making sure it was lining up. I think anytime you have, such a big bill, there are always some questions about, what does this actually mean? What does the statute mean? And again, I was very pleased with the staff. I think we had some great conversations. I don't really expect anything unforeseen to happen at this time. As I said, we're in constant contact with them, and I think that will bear fruit out. And again, some people are asking, when do you expect this to be out? And I would really think that our state will probably be one of the first to get rolled out, just for the mere fact of the level of dialogue that we had with them. Looking at some of the major, I guess, points that were raised by USAID. Again, a lot of it was clarifying language. And there were a few areas of really, I guess, dissension over the interpretation of the statute itself. If you'd like to dig into the 3 points, and again, they really covered 3 points. I did write a letter of response, and you can read that at gadoe.org.essa. But for the most part, really, it was not a very complicated process. But just one of just us going back and making sure that they understood what our intent was and where we needed to make changes based on statute. We did so. We did submit our plan yesterday, so the feds do have that out. We'll go ahead, and I'm not sure, if we've already released that version out yet. So we'll kind of make that post. Or post it online as far as what we actually presented to the feds. But as again, that is not the plan until we get actual clarification from them. Then we continue to look at that. And again, I would look at the process. I want to appreciate Dr. Timberlake and everyone that was involved with this plan. It was a plan that involved really all of Georgia to an extent. It was one in which we had a lot of participation, we had a lot of input, and I was very pleased at what we were able to craft. That being said, would I say it's the perfect plan? No, I do not. I think there are still room for changes. I think there are still room for improvement. We still deal with the federal government. They still had, I think some limitations that I would like to, see addressed. But I think also at the state level, I think there are some things that we could do to improve the options and opportunities that we have. But that being said, we are seeing a level of dialogue that I do not think I have ever seen across our nation, across our state. And I'm excited that, this is the first step. I think in listening to to the Senate and also to the House, and their belief of this is the first step. I don't think anyone has seen this as being the be-all, do-all end of everything. And for us in Georgia, taking advantage of flexibility is something that I'm very much in favor of, because I think there needs to be really a paradigm shift in looking at how we address education. We were coming out of a time period of No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top. And as an individual who lived through that, it was one that was very restrictive. It was a very compliant oriented type of mechanism, but one that did not necessarily, in my opinion, put the child first. And I say that as I traveled throughout the state, that everything was always about the test. And at the end of the day, our conversation has to be about the child. That has to become first and foremost. And that is something that I have been very relentless at, since coming on board as superintendent, but also sharing the staff. If you look at our strategic plan, it is something that, we put our children first. And I think that we will continue to work and fight for them to make sure that we give them the very best education opportunity that they possibly can receive here in Georgia. Looking at, where do we move forward? Again, of course, as I said, with ESSA, we're waiting, for feedback. But I think we've alluded a little bit as far as testing. What does testing look like within the state? And I think that within this area, we have some opportunity throughout the nation, throughout the state. And again, today I'll probably spend a little more time talking about, testing or where we're going with that, and what I think that, where we should move as a state. Since when I came on board, we know that standardized testing was kind of a big issue. I think we over-tested, overly on high-stakes testing, and again an over-emphasis on testing during instruction time. And again, I go back to the point: testing is a part of a process of education. It is not the process of education, but it is our children. And again, I think for myself, looking at what is the purpose of a test, why do we test? How is that test used? One of the things that as I look at, we have the opportunity to add flexibility to this. We will be pursuing flexibility in what that testing looks like. Again, I think that, for years, whether you call it the CRCT, whether you call it the Iowa milestones, ultimately, again, it is something I refer to as the autopsy report. It is something we get at the end of the year. I'm a strong believer in formative testing. Again, because I believe we should be able to monitor what a child is doing during the course of the year and actually measure growth, allow our teachers to make sure that they can address learning as it is going on. Not to see something that is driven by standards at the end of the year, but looking at the needs of a child. And so I think that as we continue to move forward, I think that's something we continue to hear a dialogue, something that the districts are looking for, something that I believe in. Again, it will be an uphill struggle. Again, something as we look with the feds and looking at a change, because it is a paradigm shift. It is something that, again, if you go back, for as long as I've been in education, it's been roughly 25 years now, and even as a student, this end of the course, end of the year type testing has been the norm. And I think we've reached the saturation point with that, and hopefully we'll see, the process move forward very quickly. Again, as I've shared, with you, and again, I want to reiterate, but, looking at, what is the philosophy here? I do believe in a diagnostic formative assessment that provides quick and real feedback to students and teachers that is more useful. And that's something that I really want to continue to move towards. It is something that really is not out there at this time. And so we're going to require innovation. We're going to require ingenuity. We're going to be, have to think outside the box, to be honest. And I think that we are seeing some things, and I'll talk about a few things we're doing in the state that really, approaches that level of competency that I think we're striving to get within our state. Testing really should be a tool, not a hammer. Not a punishment for teachers in schools. And I think that's something, again, we've got to move away from, looking at. I want to assure people we are going to be accountable. Accountability is a part of what we do. But I think accountability has to be fair. We have to make sure that we're appropriately using tests, in a manner that improves the education of our children. And that's something that I think, again, going back, the child has to be first in what we're doing. We have to have that ability to take the children where they're at and know that we can move them forward. For those of you who have been around in education and, again, working in the K-12 system from grades pre-K on up, it would be nice if all the kids came in at the same level. But that is not the reality of life. We deal with kids that, you think that at times that, they struggle, they have not been exposed to information, to those that really are advanced students. And so you have the complete paradigm, and really as we look at schools, a challenge of trying to move all students. And sometimes that is with the expectation that we're moving them all at the same level and all at the same time. And I think that for us, looking at growth and a very strong growth component will help that out. And I think that's why formative assessment is something that is extremely important with that. And so as we go back and look at ESSA, again, as we continue to look at some parts, we have seen a lot of change. We have seen a lot of movement in education since coming on board. ESSA again goes further in rolling back some of the tight restrictions on testing that were established during No Child Left Behind and the Race to the Top era, but still there's work to do. And as I have mentioned earlier, this is the beginning of a discussion. It is not the end of the discussion, because I do firmly believe that we still have steps to make. Again, coming into office, I work closely with the General Assembly, especially with 364, or Senate Bill 364. The law eliminated 8 high-stakes tests and gave districts the option of eliminating SLOs, or the student learning objectives. Again, leading to the largest decrease in high-stakes testing in our state's history. And I think that's very important. Again, we should not let the test drive. And I think people, appreciated that. And again, I think by doing that, and again, as you look at many of the high-performing, nations throughout the world, high-stakes testing is not something that's at the forefront. I think there's a place of letting educators do their job. And again, as I said, we're not throwing away accountability, but I think it's making it fair, and I think it's making it appropriate. Also, we work with the state board to keep dual enrollment students from having to take 2 exams for the same course. Again, a little bit of common sense, to be honest, goes a long way. And I think that's, again, from my perspective, as an educator, an individual who worked at the school level, it is putting that relevant piece into the testing. And I think everybody has talked about rigor. Rigor is the word that I heard for years and years and years, but no one mentioned, the relevant piece. And that's something that our children need to know. I mean, there is no reason that we cannot tell a child and express to them, why are you taking a course? Why are you taking a test? We have to have the answers for that. And I think that for our parents and for our community, those are things we have to be able to justify, even to our teachers as well. Why are we giving this, to our young people? Of what benefit does it allow them to move from point A to point B? And again, as we look at this, we look at state law, and again, of course, some of the things we're still above the national requirements with that. I think we continue to look at those things as well. ESSA, again, does offer some new opportunities. Again, as been mentioned, the state can apply for the innovative assessment demonstration, or, this testing pilot. We created, a task force to look into testing within our state. There's been a lot of movement, a lot of areas in which districts have, expressed and have begun the process of looking and proceeding down that road to see what are the options that are there. I think, just yesterday, I believe the requirements that were within the feds as far as what they are saying, what we can and cannot do within that, is out. And for us at George, I'm not sure. I think, we had a preliminary conversation with a lot of the individuals who were involved or going to be involved with the testing. There's concerns. There are concerns that perhaps that even the federal level with this new innovation, that perhaps maybe they're not innovative enough. that there's still too much restriction on what we can, fully be allowed to do. So I think that as we move forward, we're going to look at all options. We're going to look at options in which what we decide is what's best for Georgia. And again, I think I'm looking, forward to that and to seeing what is out there, in the days ahead. We established a fund for using, existing funds, but we're urging the legislature this year to, this session to appropriate additional resources, for this I guess, testing pilot within Georgia, so that we can support those districts that want to pursue. And again, truly being innovative, that we can make sure that they have the resources available. And again, with the resources, this is not additional funding from the DOE, but it is something that we actually have on hand. So that's something, again, not asking initially for anything new money, but I think as we move forward and see, the needs, we want to make sure that we can fully cover the expenses that, are required. And so that we don't hold anyone back, so they can have half a job done, and where we can have the advantage right now to take, full advantage of the flexibility that's out there. Again, just to show you some of the districts that are involved, this is, kind of a good overview of who's involved with our testing task force right now. Again, you'll find 11 school districts, including several who have already been doing a great job in this area. Charter schools, state legislatures, state board of education, the governor's office, lieutenant governor's office, and 10 educational organizations. The partnership included with that. So we're looking forward as we begin this next phase to see what are the options that are out there. Why are we doing the very best that we possibly can to reach our children and ensure that, yes, we are doing the job of educating them, but also making sure that we're educating them appropriately. This is a relatively large group, again, as you can look at, but it's because many people will be affected by the recommendations coming out of the committee. And we wanted to give those individuals that expressed, interest in that to be a part of the process. Again, one of the things we look at even with the ESSA is that we involved a lot of people, a lot of individuals that were out there. And I think that, having, that input, not from just a limited few, but the vast majority of Georgians, gives us a clearer picture of what we need throughout the state. And so I'm excited about this, and I think we'll, continue to see some good opportunity as we move forward with testing itself. Now, one of the ways in which we are being innovative in Georgia is something called Keenville. This is hopefully, I think, really a game changer. And we talked about the formative assessment. We talked about, being able to measure what a child is doing during the course of the year. I think Keenville, begins to take that step. It's something that, to my knowledge, I don't know that any other state, anyone else is doing this, but this is something that, really is coming from the creative minds within Georgia. Again, to meet the requirements of Senate Bill 364, which called for formative assessment in numeracy and literacy in grades 1 and 2, we're working with the Georgia Center of Assessment, as well as students, educators, and districts to develop Keenville. This is the hands-on interactive assessment for first and second grade. Now, what this will do is it will eventually, have the ability not to just say this is where you are at grade level, but it has the ability to measure, up to, I think, 5th grade. And we hope to begin to expand this, in the days ahead, so that we can, not just look at those that are perhaps need to move up to the level of acceptance, but also to make sure that we are reaching those students that are above and beyond. We never want to bring everybody down to a bar that's in the middle, but we want to set the expectation of infinite, expectation and infinite opportunity. And I think that with this does a great job in doing so. As we look at this, again, this option will be available to schools to meet the first and second requirement. Hopefully, we'll begin to roll this out, I think, next year. So that's exciting with that. But one of the things we look at, that instead of going to a vendor, instead of going to someone that perhaps has a box program that they can share with anyone and everyone out the state, this is developed, to be aligned with our standards. It's aligned so that we can make sure that Georgia students are making and meeting and exceeding the bar that we say that they have to know. And I think that's very important, that now we are looking at something that is designated for us as Georgia. It's not some vendor, it's not some publisher taking a state sticker, peeling it off, and putting Georgia on top of it. but this is something which we as Georgians can be proud of. And again, as we look at this, this will allow this, our teachers and our educators, to look over this information. And so that they can take that information and say, is Johnny and Sally, or whoever, are they on grade level? Where do we need to look at this? And also for us as a state, we can look at the standards to make sure that our standards are appropriate. Are we seeing, problems or issues within grade bands and grade levels? And so we can make the adjustments, and see this in a real time, in a real year, format. Right now, we have about 60 schools who have volunteered to be a part, or 60 districts, that have volunteered to be a part of this program. So, we're almost at half the districts who have jumped in. They have been very excited about this opportunity. Now, as we look at, again, with Keeneville, what I would say that it is age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for 6 and 7-year-olds. And that's one of the things, that we look at. We want to make sure that we talk about, we look at our standards, and I think, we'll continue to look at that review process. Math and English language arts will be coming up very shortly, and especially in the areas of K-5. I think it is so critical that we get that K-5 standard and, again, education piece critical. For me as a high school teacher, the one word that I hated to hear was the word remediation, when it came to having students up there at the high school level. We have to get that K-5 area correct. We have to make sure that our students are where they need to be. We know the research and what the research shows. English, we're looking at reading by grade 3 and math by grade 5. And hopefully this will allow us to do a better job in catching this, up, at appropriate level. And I think as we begin to expand that and look at this, I think, I'm very confident that this will allow us to do that. And with this, program and with this, opportunity, students will explore sets of problems, critical thinking tasks, and it's somewhat, in a game format. So it is in, I guess, the instructional mode that our kids are growing up with today. It is not necessarily, looking at education or where it was, but where education should be, where it can be in the future. And so I think that's one of the things we look at to make sure that, that we stay relevant. When I first started teaching, I kid with, the kids and teachers I talk with, I said, technology for me was a piece of chalk. That's as good as it got. I didn't have the computers, I didn't have, the things that were there. But here we have an expanded opportunity to really monitor what children are doing, exponentially. It allows individuals that for teachers, and again, we are not replacing the teacher. I want to make that clear. I do not believe that technology will ever replace that physical teacher. Because what I do know is that teacher has to take this information, but they need to sit down with those children. They need to have a relationship with their children. And that's one of the things that, again, and I think we continue, and I'll probably say a little bit more about that later on, but this is not a replacement, but it is just a tool. It is a tool in the box to help, make sure that we're educating our children, to the fullest. Now, as we look at this, again, student performance will be captured on a dashboard. It gives teachers and parents the information on students' reading and math performance, the resources and targeted support to help the students improve these areas where they're struggling. And again, this requires all of the Department of Education working together. And so I think that as you look at this, this is not just in isolation. This will not be something our testing and accountability, piece working this in isolation, but it is all of the DOE, whether it's teaching and instruction, teaching and learning, whether it's school improvement, our virtual school. These will be things in which we'll be using all of the department to support and make sure that our children are learning efficiently. But one of the things we look at in providing information, it again will be formative information. It will be real time, and again, it will not be at the end of the year autopsy type report that we've been talking about. So now teachers will have a true diagnostic tool that aligns with our standards, that allows them to see where their children are and to make those adjustments, rapidly and very succinctly during the school year. As we look at, Georgia testing, and providing feedback, in games, we make sure that they're appropriate for all students. Roughly right now, there will be 30 simulation activities are currently in development. 10 of those will roll out this fall. So it is an ongoing process. And I believe within the next couple board meetings, we'll actually have a preview of this information. It is under beta testing right now, and so we're looking at this and really doing a very thorough job in making sure this is not something that's going to be rolled out halfway. Because again, we need to make sure that it is at the very best format. And I think as we continue to move, so we'll see a lot of great opportunity with this. Keenville, again, is very exciting to me. It's a simulation activity that can be built to support not just these two areas. I think as we look at some of the concepts there, whether it's personal finance, whether it's history, whether it's science, these are things that eventually can be incorporated into the process. So again, we can expand as we need to, again, with a major emphasis on the core. But as we look at the opportunities here, I think there are endless possibilities. To me, this may be perhaps where we see K-5, K-8, testing and measurement go. We talked about having that single format or that single testing system. This may be something we look at in the future, because there you have the formative component that now is at the fingertips of each and every teacher in the state of Georgia. But I do want to say this as well. This is not mandated, throughout the state. If a district wants to use something else in grades 1 and 2, they can do so. We never want to undercut where the district is doing what they feel comfortable with. But I think this will be something that, is an opportunity for many school systems, especially in rural Georgia. This will be an opportunity to have something on hand. But I do believe what we will eventually see is that most, if not all, districts will eventually move to this. I, feel very strong about this component and what it can do, because again, it's something that we have listened to teachers, we've listened to educators, we've listened to students. I think we have been very thorough in vetting that, and again, using more of a business, research model that's involved with that. This is something that I think we've been very, mindful about. How do we roll this out? To make sure that it does work. Because again, we don't have a lot of options with our children. We only get one chance with them. And so I think catching them, especially at the early grades, will be something that will be very, very great. Again, currently it does cover, grades 1 and 2, but as I said, I think it can be expanded out. And again, Keenville is still in development, but, as I said, within the next couple board meetings, I think we'll be able to show some, some of the beta results and what it's looking like. And hopefully by, our anticipation is by this fall, we will have this rolling out altogether. Now, moving on to, I guess, really some other things we look at. A lot of great things are going on within education and public education in Georgia. I have visited, hundreds of schools throughout. I visited almost every district in the state, to date, and hopefully by, the end of the school year, then, I would have covered all the districts and being out there. And in one of the areas I think I'm very proud of and very, honored to have been associated with is our CTA program. This is one of the top programs in the nation. When we look at, and when I'm out and meeting with individuals, Georgia is recognized as really one of the top 1, 2 up there in CTA. I think where we have gone, the pathways, and again, learning, the opportunities and moving away from the one-size-fits-all where we said everyone had to go to a 4-year university is now we're looking at opportunities. But this is opportunities not for just those students that decide to go to a technical college, decide to go to the military or an internship, but this is for all individuals. And I think it's so important to expand those opportunities. And this is what we're talking about with CTA. We are expanding opportunities for our young people. To give them those options and opportunities to go into courses, to see work, to expand and really, experience a little bit of what life is all about. We've seen a lot of great success here. Again, we have a 96% graduation rate for our pathway completers. This is 15, almost 15 and a half points, higher than our state average. 26 of our districts have 100% graduation in our career pathway. So, we're seeing, a lot of good growth here. To show you, talk about this is something for all children, not limiting education, to say everyone's got to fit in the same box. But the couple of kids you see up here, one of these individuals, was a pathway completer. The top individual, I think, went to West Point. Okay, so again, we're not talking about this is, education. In the past, sometimes we're seeing that these were classes for the other kids. Okay, that is something that is changing in Georgia. This is not education for other kids, but this is education for all kids. We also have a young lady up here, who went on to study computer engineering at Georgia State. So again, it does not limit to say that you can only attend a technical college or doing some things. But I think that what I've tried to emphasize throughout my term in office is that any type of education is important. Any type of education is variable. I was an individual who went to technical school. I grew up in a military family, so I know a little bit about what the challenges are there. I worked in a carpet mill. I worked in a peanut mill, so I've seen factory life. I've been to technical school. I've been to engineering school. I've been to all these things. And I think for us in Georgia, what we have to emphasize is that get a good education. And I think for us is making that education meaningful. And CTA does that. I mean, it is something that expands opportunity. There's a lot of great opportunities, in going to, one of our schools, especially in one of these programs. I mean, I had a young lady, I asked her, I said, where are you, she was taking culinary arts, and I said, where are you, looking to, get on, the home garden, channel, food channel, and, maybe pursue something there. And she looked at me and said, no, I said, I really want to, go to a university, but I'm going to use my culinary skills to pay for that. So I think those are things we look at, giving our kids opportunities. And I think this is what CTA, I know this is what CTA does. As we look at this, again, it's important. It's just not a path to, a career or to a technical college, but students, again, can participate with this, and it really increases education. Again, I could share you with stories with our students with disabilities. This is a great program of study that has helped many of them to find relevance and meaning, and success in education. And it's showing that, yes, you can do these things. And I think that one of the limits we did, and again, I think, by the years past of saying everyone had to go to a 4-year college. I mean, we set up disappointment. We set up failures for a lot of our children. Not that they couldn't do, but I think that, again, just to limit the opportunities. And again, for you, if I were to limit you and to say that you can only take this small coursework, how would you feel? How would you feel about sitting and saying this is the limits that you did? And I think that within Georgia, what we are seeing is that we are expanding those opportunities for our children. And again, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about CTA and the days ahead. As we look, of course, this past year we had a lot about improving schools. I think you've already heard Dr. Thomas about that. And again, my role, again, whether it's working with, the CTO and Dr. Thomas, we're involved with that. Because we're talking about children. This is not a point of pride for me. It is not something that I'm going to ignore. It is, within our law. But, at the end of the day, we know that we are not perfect. We know that there are schools that still struggle. There are schools that face challenges. And for us at the Department of Education, that means we are here to help and serve them. Ultimately, my goal is to make sure that, I think Dr. Thomas doesn't have a job, okay? And that's because we know that our schools are succeeding at that point. That's what we want. We want to make sure that every school is succeeding. I would love to say that, that perhaps we could drive, this division out of a job to make sure that everyone is there and succeeding. We want to make sure that all schools are succeeding because we know by doing so that our children have those opportunities. We recently hired Stephanie Johnson from Maynard Jackson High School. Again, an individual that I got to know that this lady knows school improvement. She's done it 3 times. And I think this was the right person, to lead the state, to lead us to make sure that all schools, continue to move in a direction in which we're seeing, our young people have great opportunities. And last month we saw 61 schools, exit the priority and focus list. So we are seeing movement and growth throughout this process. In a majority of the schools that were on the turnaround list, again, many who were served by the department, we did see movement. And again, 51 of the schools improved by 5 points, 17 improved by 10 or more points. So I think the work that is being done, we are seeing the progress. Again, it does not mean we are there yet. And I think there are challenges and things we look at throughout, looking at, what does education, mean? And again, I go back to saying putting these opportunities of CTAE, will help increase that. The dual enrollment that we're seeing, increases that. A focus on K-5 education is something we will continue to see in those areas, and that will naturally improve education. Talking about school climate. I mean, things that perhaps they're not necessarily, we don't measure on a CCRPI, but things we know that have a direct bearing on education. And so I think those are things we look at, a holistic approach of education. It's extremely important to make sure that we look at all facets of what we know has an impact that. Parent involvement, community involvement, those are things that we need. Getting our shareholders involved. Getting business, not seeing them as individuals who we reach out for money, but having them involved in the education process is extremely important. As we look at this, again, seeing some of the great success, education, our graduation rate is up above 80% for the first time, using the new 4-year cohort that was established by the Department of Education. We're seeing, increases on ACT and SAT, Georgia milestones. So we know that education is taking place. These are scores that, especially with the ACT and SAT, that are outside of our standards. But yet they are measurements that, that are recognized throughout the nation, and so we're really excited about that. I don't take credit for this because, again, as I go out and throughout the state, I see individuals who are working and they are spending time, and teachers and educators and community members are coming together. So I give credit to those at the school level. I give credit to our teachers that are spending time with these individuals. And so we're looking forward, again, as we continue to move, and I think our projection, is in a very positive light. Again, as I close with this, it's been an honor to be Georgia's, state school superintendent since coming on. It has been a job that, yes, it has been full of challenges, but it has been one that has been very rewarding. That is one that I think we are seeing, really a paradigm shift, throughout the state and throughout the nation. Again, I go back that for many years, really education was about the test. And I can tell you that because that's what I heard at the school day in and day out. The word child did not exist in our dialogue. And I think that is something that we are beginning to see. It is something that as I go out, I hear more and more about, the focus being on the children. And I think that, not only saying what is the focus on our children, but it is preparing them for life, not to take a test. Because I go back and I share with you, I think that any path and occupation, that our children want to pursue, we should give them that opportunity. I don't think there should be any restriction to say that you can only go to a technical school. You can only go to the military. You can only go to the university. I think all things are open to all individuals. If they are willing to put the work, if they're willing to put the initiative, and we're committed to providing them the opportunities, that we need to do so. I think, preparing them for life, I think that means that we provide them the opportunity to be a lifelong learner. I don't think any child or any individual should stop learning. And I think that even for myself in this role, it is one that we continue to learn. I think that being job ready, being able to navigate those cycles of employment and unemployment, of need, definitely comes into place. And having that ability to lead. I think individuals that, at some point, all individuals will become a leader. And it may be that perhaps they say, well, the only thing I lead is my family. Well, I can tell you that's the most important leadership that you will probably have in life, is to be able to lead children and to lead, your family. I think expanding those opportunities, we want to make sure that education is relational. I think the most important thing that a teacher can do, and first and foremost, is to build a relationship with their children. You think about who was your very best and favorite teacher. Who was the individual that had an impact on you? In all likelihood, I don't know that individual. I probably have never met that individual. But what I can tell you with absolute certainty is that individual had a relationship with you. Those are things that we've got to get back to doing, what we know is right in education. Because if our teachers have a relationship with our children, they know our children. They know what makes them work. They know what makes them tick. They know where their deficits are. And again, that's something that I think you cannot replace. And so I think, making education relational, I think, as I shared, making it relevant and relatable. Telling our kids, this is why. This is, if you take this, or why we're taking this, this will give you the opportunity to go to this destination. And providing that information to making sure that it is very relevant. Not just, again, as I said, rigorous, but it has to be relevant to the child. It has to, you have to be able to answer the question why. And I think that is no different than anyone here and any adult that, I run across with. Supporting our teachers and leaders, again, as we look at that, again, in my opinion, I would say the most important individual that probably in education right now is the school principal. I think you will never have, the teachers and the capacity of that school will never go above the ability of that individual to lead. I think leadership does have a cap. And we have to make sure that our very best leaders are there because they will project the vision, they will be able to monitor, and it should be their, anticipation that they are raising, the level of opportunity for their teachers. Again, K-5 education continues to be important. I think, again, as I've shared numerous times, I think reading is the most important skill that we can transfer. So again, our best days are ahead, and I look forward to, serving. And again, I hope I have another 4 years. We'll see how the election cycle goes, but it has been my pleasure. And again, as I said, I think if I had to give a good report, we are heading in the right direction of Georgia. Not there yet, but we're going to get there. Okay? Yes, sir.
In Clark County, the great majority of students in the Career Academy are taking college courses. They're just taking the opportunity to get free college. Mm-hmm. And the vision of a lot of technical training just has not happened. Is that unique, or is that a problem elsewhere?
Well, again, I would have to look a little bit more into the situation. Again, with dual enrollment, with that, I think that is an expansion. Of course, where do you take the college courses? Now, some of that may mean the core classes. I think in my experience, a lot of students take the math, the required college math, reading, social studies, things of that nature. I would hope at the college career, again, finding more information about it, but you still have opportunities in the career pathways. I think those open up opportunities. So within some of the career pathways, you see a blend of academics and also the career opportunities as well. Yes, sir.
Well, what's the biggest misconception of Georgia's education that you've seen written or said that you want to set straight?
Well, I think that we're performing, again, maybe a conception that public education isn't doing the job. When I look out there, I think as you begin to look at some things, again, sometimes we face a national narrative that is there. Of course, that always, is something you look at. Of course, there are agendas that people want to put forth. But, as I've traveled throughout Georgia, there's not a school that I have went into that I do not have a wow experience. Education, as I reflect back and I think about when I was a student, when I was a teacher, when I was an administrator, our children have more opportunities today than they ever have in the history of education during my lifetime. To say that you can, again, a lot of students now earning high school credit in middle school, that was unheard of. And again, what that does is it opens up opportunities to take more courses in high school. Of course, with dual enrollment, now you can not only leave with education, with a high school diploma, but at least 2 years of college credit that's there. So again, you begin to see the options of students really taking hold and saying, wow, my education, I can understand that. I can pursue this. So I think we're seeing great opportunities. But I think that it's also meaningful. I think when I go back looking at the ACT and SAT, those scores are going up when our participation, especially in the ACT, is up. Now, national trend is going in the other direction. So that lets me know that something's going on right there. Our graduation rate is up. And again, there's been nothing that cuts down as far as the rigor that's there. So I'm excited about that. I think that, as I go out, I invite people, as I travel, the members of the General Assembly, the members of the community, said, come out to the schools with us. The buildings and the investment that is going on within the children's education, it is phenomenal. I could, again, instead of just 10 minutes or up here, I could talk for 10 hours. of the good things that are really going on throughout the state. And I mean, it is just overwhelming. So I think, we're beating a narrative that's down, but it is just something that, that just takes time. That, people, they remember, especially when you talk about CTAE. I mean, people, perhaps my age and maybe a little older, they think, well, that's just grandpa's old shop class. Well, when you talk about mechatronics, when you talk about, pursuing a medical degree, when you talk about doing research out there, STEM and STEAM opportunities, again, I didn't even mention that. The fine arts opportunities that are out there, which I'm very pleased to see. It's a good balance, but it is something that I think that people who have children in education, they see the good things that are going on. Yes, sir.
It just seems like for the last, at least last 20 years, we've battled the federal government and its very onerous rules. Now it seems like, honestly, the Trump administration and certainly Secretary DeVos are not as involved in education at the local level. They've taken off, it seems to me, a lot of the requirements. That's going to push a lot of the accomplishments down to the state level and to me the local level to get it right, because you can't blame the federal government anymore because they're really not involved.
Yeah.
So are you going to support giving school systems much more flexibility and allowing them to design programs that work best for them? Is that something that you're going to push legislature for as well?
I think it's really happening on its own. Again, I've always been a strong proponent of local control. I think that there again, as we talked about, there are many differences within schools or within children. The same is for school districts. I mean, if I go to the school districts, the needs are different. What you can experience up here in Metro Georgia looks completely different, in parts of rural Georgia. I think that, we're expanding conversations with people. Businesses, again, as I look at the transformation, how we interact with business is completely different. And I think that there again, we're talking about school systems. Say, is there a business that really supports, the economic drive within your community? Well, now business and schools can now work together and create pathways that better align with them.
Would you support school systems only having to follow the federal mandates for assessments, or are you going to push that we have the state mandates as well?
I would say everything is on the table. I think there again, with some of the federal mandates, I don't know that I would go above their minimum, but I think that they're still a little restrictive with some areas that really hold back some of the flexibility that we would like. I think in the days ahead, when you see the recommendations that come out of the testing task force, you're going to see some creative things, and it will really be more conducive to giving local control and allowing school systems to really craft their own success platform. Yes, Tom.
It looks like we're not going to get any changes to the state's 30-year-old funding formula, and I'm wondering if you can look at handicapped schools somehow.
Well, I would say if we fully fund the formula, I mean that would be a big plus. And I think there's been talk about that to fully end austerity cuts. Now, does it restrict? I think sure it does restrict because education has changed. I think that as you look at some things, and again I'll just talk about rural Georgia. Transportation is a big issue down there. I mean, you have counties that move students a large distance. You may be on a bus an hour and a half. And so that means education looks completely different. Looking at the funding of what you can and cannot do, may cut some of the options and opportunities that are out there. Again, as I agree, I don't know that will necessarily be addressed this legislative session, just because of the nature of the election cycle, and and I'm just being honest with that. I think people have asked me what to expect, and I said I really don't know, because it's just a kind of a different bird when you have an election cycle like this, especially in the area of state leadership. But that being said, I think we always continue to move forward. I think we continue to look at that, and and I'm listening to school districts, and we'll be working with members of the General Assembly where we can make some advances. We're definitely going to try that, and I think definitely has a big weight with that. Some of the things I think we're looking at the legislature of what does eSPLOST look like? What are some options that they have with spending there? For us, even though we have some caps with that, but I think our federal pilot right now, as far as our federal funding, opens up a lot of opportunities for how we spend money. And so that may allow school systems, and hopefully they'll allow school systems to better address needs that are specific to them. So, we'll continue to see on that. But it should be exciting. Like I said, it's, 40 days of fun, so we'll see.